And we are good to go. We are rolling.
All right. So will we see people start to, there we go. There's my answer. We'll give it just a minute or so, and then we'll formally kick this thing off. Well, I guess we won't see more than one box pop up. Everyone will flow through that webinars and meetings box apparently. All right. Well, it's 5:04 now. So welcome to everyone to our 2020 School Board School. I'm Nate Hogan. I'm the Vice Chair of the Kansas City Public School Board. And in my day job, because this is absolutely my evening and, well, sometimes my day job as well, and my weekend job, I'm the Vice President of Healthcare Solutions at a local government technology company. And I am going to be your MC tonight. I wanted to start by saying that you are considering either looking for information or considering on embarking upon a really, really incredible and fulfilling journey. In fact, speaking for myself, and I know for my fellow school board colleagues as well, this is by far the most fulfilling professional thing that I've ever done, which is interesting because I get paid nothing for it. And so you wouldn't expect those two to be aligned the way in which they are, but they are for me personally. I love the work that we do. A lot of the work that we do has an immediate or near immediate impact on our kids' lives and their ability to go be successful in their future. So we welcome the opportunity to have this conversation with you today to share some really important information. I know for me, in starting out and doing school board school on one Saturday morning a couple of years ago, I walked away feeling incredibly compelled to go do this work. I walked away being a lot more informed and knowledgeable about the challenges that our kids face in this community and across the state of Missouri. I also walked away meeting some really incredible people that I end up spending a lot of my time working with, both with my school board colleagues and administration here at Kansas City Public Schools. So thank you again for joining. Thank you for considering this journey. And with that being said, one sort of quick housekeeping note. If you would open up the chat feature here in Zoom and type in your name so we know that you're here. And if you want to type a brief summary about why you joined our conversation tonight, please do that as well. And I will go through the agenda here in a second, but I want to introduce Susan Stocking, who's here from our District Advisory Committee, and allow her to say a few words about Kansas City Public Schools. Susan?
Thank you, Nate. Good evening, everyone. I am Susan Stocking. I'm a parent in the district. I have a 7th grader at Paseo, and I have been a member of the District Advisory Committee, which is a group of parents, community members that get together and collaborate and with board members, with the KCPS administration, Dr. Bedell, all of that. So the purpose of me joining tonight is really just to introduce the District Advisory Committee. And hopefully, if you are interested in serving on the school board, if you decide that's not the route that you take, that you would be interested in joining us on the District Advisory Committee, either as a parent or a community member. We're looking for people who are interested in serving on the executive board as well too. It's not as an intensive of a commitment as the school board, clearly, but we do work with the school board on issues like legislation, equity, trauma-informed practices, language services. A lot of things that touch the students are things that we advocate for with the DAC. We also work with the school board members when they are wanting to get some perspective or some parent input too. So I am going to put my name in the chat and my email address. And if you are interested in more information about the District Advisory Committee, serving on the District Advisory Committee, joining us for meetings, please email, and I'll get you hooked up with some good people, some good information. Thank you so much. Back to you, Nate.
Thanks, Susan. Yeah, the DAC is an incredibly important part of our public education ecosystem in Kansas City and really across the state and the country. And so, again, as Susan mentioned, if for whatever reason you make a decision not to run for school board, or if you make that decision and for whatever reason aren't elected to be a part of the school board, then that is another opportunity for you to engage the DAC is directly in the work that we're doing. It's important, and we would welcome the opportunity to work with you. So in terms of the agenda, we're going to we really got a star-studded group of people, although there are a bunch of stars you've probably never heard of, or maybe you have, but either way, we've got a great lineup for you tonight and some really important topics to share with you. So we'll start things off with our CFO and COO, Linda Quinley, and our school board colleague who also chairs our government relations committee, Jennifer Wolfsey. So they'll spend some time initially, and then Janet Tilley, who's with our Missouri School Board Association and is the senior director there and is really our confidant and an expert in public education and has been committed to this work for a very long time. So she'll talk to you about the role of the board, what our responsibilities are, and how important governance is to those responsibilities. And then June Kolkmeyer, who's our board secretary, who you see, if you've joined a school board meeting, you see her alongside the board on a regular basis, helping make sure that we get things done right. And so she's going to talk about the rules around elections and what those requirements are to file, what the timeline is, et cetera. And then we will make time at the end of this conversation for Q&A. And we'll do that throughout as well. In terms of, if you want to put a question in the chat feature, please do so throughout. And then at the end of each one of those presentations, we'll address those questions and just kind of go from there. So with that being said, Linda and Jennifer, I'll toss it over to you.
Remember to unmute. All right. My name is Jennifer Wolfsey. As Nate said, I am a parent in the district I added it up, 15 years. I have a senior at Lincoln and an 8th grader at Paseo. I'm as I mentioned, at-large member. I've been on the board since 2016, and I was reelected recently in 2019. And myself and Linda will go through the public education landscape in Kansas City. So Linda, you ready to kick this thing off?
How's that?
Oh, there we go. She's driving, everybody, just so you know. And so I don't know if you can see Linda there too. Linda, do you want to just introduce yourself real quick?
Sure. I'm Linda Quinley, Chief of Finance and Operations for the district. And I just was thinking, I no longer feel new. This is year 4 for me at KCPS after having spent 11 years at Columbia Public Schools. So excited to do this work and get to work with our leadership team and this really great Board of Education that we have.
Thank you. Okay, let's go to the first slide then.
Okay, well, for some reason I can't make it page.
Well, while she's figuring that out, I'll let you guys know. This is going to kind of be a pretty fast-paced night. We're going to take about 20 minutes, Linda and I, to go through our portion, and we've saved 10 minutes at the end for people's questions. So like Nate mentioned, as you hear us go through the presentation, if you think of something, go ahead and type it in the chat and he'll curate those questions for us at the end. So to start off, essentially for the longest time, since we'd had charters in 1999 when they came into existence, really there had never been a comprehensive assessment of our entire system, that meaning Kansas City Public Schools and charters. And not surprisingly, there was little coordination or collaboration. So it was about in 2018 that we had been looking at a lot of our internal numbers, especially around things like mobility, which is when a student might move in and out of a school. And we thought we really need to do a system-wide assessment. We need to look at things like academic achievement. We need to look at our demographics. I had mentioned the mobility and just things like implications as it relates to finance and operations. So we did that starting in 2018. And out of that, we also we said, okay, well, there does need to be greater collaboration between districts and charter, essentially to make a public education system in Kansas City that works for every student, that there are more opportunities for the students in that system. And that was our goal, essentially. Next slide, please. Oh, wrong direction.
I want to go the right direction.
Okay, you can go ahead and skip this. This is our whole entire piece is really about the system. So let's just take a look at enrollment over it's 10, 20, 30-year period. So in the 1990s, we essentially saw enrollment kind of staying about the same, 34 to 35,000. In 1999, like I mentioned, the statute was written where charters could come into existence. And in 2000, I think that was the first one opened its doors. So you'll see on this chart, the gray line at the top is the total enrollment, and the blue line is KCPS, and the orange line are the charter enrollments. And you'll see over the next 10 years from 1999 to 2009, as an overall, we lost about 10,000 students total. Now, part of that was due to the red line is the annexation of a few of the schools on the east side of our district. We did annex those, I believe, 2009 to the independent school district. But you can also see that Kansas City Public Schools was having a fairly significant decline during that time. But charters actually were starting to increase. And then as you see over the next from 2009 to even 2021, and those are, I believe, prelim numbers. They've not been finalized, if I understood that correctly. The system itself overall in the gray line is actually starting to increase again after about 2015 to the current, but a lot of that growth, while we were staying pretty steady up until kind of recently, a lot of that growth is coming from the charter sector. Next slide, please. So what we want to do is try to give you a comparison here. We have approximately 27,000 students now in our system. And so we looked around, and the system that we decided to compare ourselves to was Springfield, Missouri. They have about 25,000 students. But what's interesting to see here is the number of actual schools in those systems for a similar amount of students. Where you have 15 with us, you have 5 in Springfield. 21 here in Kansas City, you have 9 in Springfield, and then 44 in Kansas City and 36 in Springfield. A lot of ours is due to the fact that we do have charters here, and we have 4 charter sponsors, of which we are also one, Kansas City Public Schools. And but those charter schools are run by what we say are 21 charter operators. And if you think about it, those are essentially like 21 mini districts. If you added us, we have a total of 22 district administrations in Kansas City, as opposed to Springfield, Missouri, where you really have one district administration for those that school system. Next slide, please. So while we have a lot of choice, and I'll show you that in the next 2 slides, choice sometimes comes with some unintended consequences. One of which is we've started to notice a retention issue. And where we might start with 2,500 students, we end up with roughly half that amount of students at 12th grade. And so, that is not where we would like to be. We want to have a system that people want to remain in, and that there are opportunities here that they want to remain for. So next slide, please. So this slide may help to explain some of what's going on there when we're starting to lose so many students from kindergarten to 12th grade. This one is actually the Kansas City Public School configurations and feeder patterns. And if you start on the left-hand side of this, you'll see kind of what many of us grew up with, which was, you have your traditional neighborhood elementary school that feeds to middle schools, that feeds to high schools. And in that case, we have 18 elementary that go to 2 middle and 4 high. On the left, or on the right side, in light blue, are more of what I term kind of our magnet themes that tended to resonate more, and they've had, they've remained popular amongst parents and students. But there is some choppiness, if you will, there amongst the grade configurations and the feeder patterns. But you can see what those configurations are and the different themes there. If you'll go to the next slide, I believe it goes into, yeah. This is actually more of looking at it from a charters perspective. Again, on the left-hand side, it really shows you those charters that have been able to put together either a pre-K through 12 or kindergarten through 12 sort of pattern of schooling. And then more as you move towards the right, it's still, you have some that can go K through 8, but maybe then there's a gap. They don't go. And I do believe this chart actually needs to be updated a little bit, because I do believe some of the charters are now going through high school, and that in Lafayette in particular. But you can see the remaining charters there, and just kind of the way that they have patterned themselves out as far as grade configurations. And just COTW is Citizens of the World, for those that don't know. And Academy for Integrated Arts was AFIA. You're good. You can go ahead and go to the next one. So again, taking a look at what this means specifically in high school, when we get to compare ourselves to our system, again, KCPS plus charters, to the city of Springfield and Springfield Public Schools. You have similar amounts of students, just a little bit less in ours, but the average per building really takes a hit there when you have so many buildings. And for those that maybe don't know a lot about why this is important, high school is that experience where you want to be able to kind of try out all these different things academically, extracurricularly, athletically, and a lot of times the way that you're able to offer all those opportunities is through efficiency, operational efficiency. And you get that when you're able to reach certain thresholds in the high school world. And so I don't know, Linda, if you're going to talk a little bit about that. I don't know those threshold labels, but she'll talk about that a little bit later. Next slide, please. One of the other things we've seen that's really not something we're happy about is that it does appear that the system itself is becoming more economically and racially segregated. And we look at that in two ways. The percentage of segregated schools and the number and percentage of intensively segregated schools. And just so you know, it's at the bottom of the slide if you ever want to go back and reference this. But segregated means more than 75% of children receive free and reduced lunch, and are more than 75% are Black and Hispanic. And that number goes up to 90% when we talk about intensively segregated schools. Again, one of the other maybe unintended consequences of choice. Moving on to the next slide. I think that's Linda's cue.
It is, thank you. Mm-hmm. So as Ms. Wolfsey and I talk about our system, we are talking always about our numbers combined with charter schools. And so I just want to say that a couple of times, because as we get into the weeds on numbers, sometimes that's easy to forget. I'm not going to read you this whole slide, but give you a bit of a snippet on how local revenue share works in a charter county, which Kansas City and St. Louis are the only two charter counties in the state of Missouri currently. So the only two counties, Jackson County and St. Louis County, are the only two counties where charter schools can be. And really, in Jackson County, just the KCPS boundaries because of some of the rules. But the Missouri law says that charters will share in current and delinquent local property taxes. You'll hear a lot of conversation about that charter schools don't have access to all local revenues, and that is a true statement. One of the things, though, that doesn't quite balance it, but certainly helps them, is that the formula by which they receive those local dollars assumes two things that are never accurate. And I love how our board has absorbed this, so I could let them tell this and they would do a really great job of it. But I've got the mic, so I'm going to do it. It assumes, first off, that the assessed valuation established as of July 31st is the final assessed valuation, meaning no one appeals and no one wins their appeals, which we know to be an incorrect assumption. It also then assumes that 100% of taxes are paid, which we also know not to be true. So the charter local share of property taxes is higher per pupil than what the district gets, because we of course live with the actual collections, and then some lines of local revenues that we receive, charters don't share. But just an important piece of information, what's happened over the last few years with that local share, you can see that the amount of local taxes stays right around that 45.75 to 46.75 amount. So it doesn't change significantly. And that's mostly because through this time period, our assessed valuation has remained flat. It is a 2-year in arrears because that's the only way DESE can figure out how to do it. So we're going to see for charter schools, this amount's going to go up fairly significantly in that 21-22 school year when the 2019 assessment becomes available to them. But the other important thing here, you can see that while this amount went down a little bit between these 2 years, counts of students went up. So you've got flat revenues with more students. It's going to naturally mean less revenue per pupil. On the state funding side, the formula is the same as it is across the rest of the state. And so both we and charters earn whatever the state amount is, right at $4,000 per WADA, which I apologize, I should have defined as weighted average daily attendance. So if you have 100 students enrolled and they attend 90% of the time, you're going to get paid for 90 students. That's what WADA is. So collectively, this is the revenue coming from state and local that charters are receiving. And the way that passes through is, again, the state's assuming our collections, and they are reducing our $4,000 per pupil by an amount that would pay this $4,600 per pupil to charter schools. So as charter schools have eked up in that count of student, this number is larger than this number by $600, so that we've gotten to this point where there's not enough state funding for KCPS to pass through the local funding. Last year, it actually meant that instead of $4,000 per pupil, we collected, or in 18-19 actually, we collected $71 per pupil from the state, or roughly $6 a month. And that's important from a timing perspective that we'll talk about a little later. So this is just a history for Kansas City Public Schools to show you the annual and the monthly amount of state funding that we used to receive coming down to last year. Last year, we received 0 state funding because of that share we just discussed, where we needed to share those local revenues with charter schools. And so this is highly unusual in Missouri school systems and calls for us to keep a very high fund balance. And that fund balance is basically your cash reserves, your cash in bank as of June 30th, because we don't get this monthly influx like most districts do. When I was in Columbia, I think we got about right at $3 million a month from DESE, which helps you pay the bills, right, along the way. But since we receive nothing from DESE now, we've got to start the year with a really high cash balance, because we have to wait until January when we start receiving tax collections to have revenue cash flow again. Just to note, because we're going to look at some cost per pupil, in 2018-19, our board committed to really allowing some additional resources to reinvent our educational program and to staff our buildings at higher levels. So we committed about $5 million a year in the operating budget for 72 FTE that were all school-based around supports for students in some fashion or another. And that is important because it shows up right here. In the state of Missouri, expenditures per pupil is a standard calculation. We all do it the same way, and we report it to DESE so that you as a parent can compare and look and understand how schools are spending. And so what this chart shows you in this first column, if we look back over this 10-year history, in 2009-10 per pupil, we were spending just over $15,000 at Kansas City Public Schools. And then in 10-11, that went down significantly, and then down again the year after that, and down again the year after that. And then it started coming back up. And then in 16-17, it went down, and 17-18, it went down when we were doing some other work. In 18-19 is the first year that we got back to the same spend as 2009-2010. And it was because of those additions that we made that we looked at on that previous slide. On the flip side, what's happened with charter schools during that time period is in 9-10, they were spending just under $11,000, and today they're spending $14,165. So they're spending about $900 less per pupil than we are. But while we're only spending $24 more than we were 10 years ago, charters are spending $32.85 more than they were 10 years ago. So just showing you a little bit of what has happened over the time. One thing that's really important to keep in mind when you look at our 15,000 compared to their 14,000 here is that our demographics are pretty different. While most of our charter schools do have special education and non-English language students or English language learners and free and reduced lunch Title I eligible students, KCPS tends to have the higher majority of those students. So therefore, we tend to have what would be referred to as a higher need population that we serve. So charter funding, as we look at this, is a really interesting component. We looked back on a previous page that between local and state revenues, they're getting about $8,500, but we just saw that they're spending $14,000 with an average enrollment of $621 per school. So they've got to make up $5,583. Now KCPS is spending $15,000 with basically the same amount of money. And we're making that up through Title I funding would be one of our larger lines of revenue. And the kinds of federal programs that support special education and special needs students of various types. Charter schools, their largest line of revenue comes from this $8,500, which is their state and local. Their second largest line of revenue is gifts and donations. So this is an average charter school, not in total. So on average, the charter schools bring in about $867,000 of donations. That will vary from very small in some schools, maybe 50,000 or less, to millions of dollars in other schools. And their third largest line is their child nutrition revenue that is mostly federally funded, and then of course family funded. These two lines have flipped in the last couple of years since we started doing this study and keeping track of this data, which is really an interesting component. Kansas City Public Schools, this is the average per charter school. KCPS does not receive that amount annually. So talking about those economic inefficiencies that Ms. Wolfsey led us into and shared some of those numbers on number of students, number of buildings, those kinds of things. If you think about that, we're serving the same number of students with 3 times the number of buildings almost. And that administration, Ms. Wolfsey referenced this, that we have to have administration and leadership at these buildings. So in Kansas City, we have 1 administrator for every 149 students in the 2018-19 school year. And are spending $56 million on administration. Again, this is us plus charters. In Springfield, our comparative district, they have 1 for every 253 and spending $29 million. So you see right here the inefficiency because strictly the number of buildings, and you've got to have a principal and you've got to have a principal secretary and you have to have those folks to run that side of the work. Where you see green numbers, it means improvement since our 17-18 numbers. So both our system as a whole and Springfield got a little more efficient here, but you can see that we're putting a lot of money into administration in Kansas City. Instruction, that's where you want to spend your money because that's about classroom teachers and the things it takes to actually deliver instruction. In the Kansas City system, We're spending 126 million compared to 95 million in Springfield. We are spending more than them, but per pupil, this is going to be, Springfield is going to be more efficient because they are able to be more efficient with class size and not have as many small classes. Whereas in Kansas City Public Schools, because of the small number of students in schools, we tend to, us plus charters tend to be smaller class size. We're spending relatively the same number on extracurricular activity for students. And that looks like a comparison not to really think about or process. But if we go back to that slide of the number of high schools alone, 15 versus 5, and you think about the number of teams, the amount per sport here is considerably less in Kansas City, just because we have so many more schools to cover with the same amount of money. Another component of this is transportation. This is one that every one of us in the system talk about all the time, wanting to try to improve. And we're getting there. We are definitely getting there. But if you, in Springfield, they cover just over 300 square miles. And in Kansas City, we cover about 67 square miles. But because we are a system of choice, we may be picking a child up at the northernmost part of our boundaries and transporting them to the southern part, and charters are doing door to door. And so that's a very inefficient system. We're actually all penalized in the state funding formula because of the inefficiency of our systems, and that's about choice. 3 of our charters do not provide transportation. However, you can see here that we're spending 4.5 times as much as Springfield is for transportation. And so $23 million going to busing that Springfield has the opportunity to put into instruction or other things for students. And then again, that greater number of facilities, of course, creates an inefficiency in the cost of plant. Cost of plant is custodial and utilities and repair and maintenance, the day-to-day. This is not about capital improvement, or you'd see Springfield spending more than us. But the total spend for operational plant, again, we are spending twice as much in Kansas City because we have considerably more buildings with that same number of students. So I would say to you, as I turn this back over to Ms. Wolfsey, what we're trying to do as a system is study and know our inefficiencies, collaborate on them where we can, and she'll talk a little more about some of that work that we've done. But just knowing where we are, we thought was important as we started determining for ourselves how we can improve the inefficiencies of the system and to make sure that they're understood.
Thanks, Linda. As I go into this, Linda, I think just hearing you talk, I'm going to do board principles and tee up the tiers, but could you, because you have much deeper explanation or understanding of the new things we're doing, I'll pitch that back to you. So if you'll go to the next slide. So in 2000, I believe it was 17, 18, Dr. Bedell came to the board and he said, I'd like to bring some things to you, opportunities for partnership. And as you can imagine, there were 9 of us at that time. Everybody had their own definition of what partnership meant. And so what we asked him was some time to have us create one voice around, well, what does that mean? And what are we comfortable with? Because it wasn't fair to him to try and pick our brains. So we spent 9 months and a lot of time talking to one another, understanding what it is we were trying to, we wanted to give him a very clear understanding of what we would be comfortable exploring. And that process produced these board principles. I won't read them all to you. I'll just highlight the parts that need highlighting. They'll be in the packet that you'll be able to take a look at afterwards. But they were, first, and this is all around the proposals that would come to us. We wanted to make sure they would enhance equity and opportunity for students, because as you can see, we already had kind of the beginnings of a very inefficient system. So we also wanted to make sure that they added to a more coordinated system and not compromise the financial sustainability or add to what we were already seeing as inefficiency and redundancy. We hoped that they would meet an unmet need and contribute to the overall academic improvement of the system. And more importantly, we really felt that we needed to be perceived and seen as a collaborative ed thought partner, not just an organization that they needed something from. Next slide, please. It goes without saying, they had to demonstrate educational expertise and the capacity to manage this some sort of program. Important to us was that we wanted to make sure, we live under certain academic and financial accountability standards that are, put forth by DESE. And we wanted to make sure that we had a process where we were sharing data and that they were going to also align with those same accountability standards. We expected that they would have a program that ensured diversity, not only among students, but mostly around staff as well. And very important to us was making sure that parents, students, and the community were involved in the development of the school. Could you go to the next slide, please? So what happened was, after the principles were approved, the administration took those principles and created some tiering opportunities, ways in which we could collaborate. Left to right, these essentially started with kind of some easy, low-hanging fruit type of opportunities where we could share some best practices that we had known with others, and we would like to do some system-wide planning. Tier 2 was a little bit of a step further, which is like, well, maybe there's some collective buying power we could help each other out with. So that was a part of Tier 2, shared purchasing and contracting for some of the things that we do as services and resources. And then Tier 3 was really where things were going, which was a school model partnership. So that could be one of various kinds: partnership school, one where we would sponsor the charter, or where we would actually serve as the charter's LEA, or possibly even have co-location. And I'll ask Linda, because the next slide are some examples of what's actually now in place. So if you'll talk about those.
Yes, happy to. So we've gotten started, and it's been good work. We've created a collaboration council with the charter schools, and we meet monthly. Interestingly, but not surprisingly, they are mostly interested in those Tier 2 things, in accessing our buying power and accessing our expertise around some of the things that maybe they don't have a large enough staff to have expertise in, but we're making progress in all areas. Currently, there is a special education collaboration where there's monthly meetings with the special education leaders of charters. Our special education program leaders don't necessarily participate in that, because what we found is the charters have some pretty different needs as compared to ours. And our KCPS Director of Ed Systems, we're very lucky, has a special education background. So that is occurring regularly. We're working on a common student record platform so that we can assist in record transfers to be timely and efficient and accurate, because kids move in and out of our schools and charter schools throughout the year. It's amazed me when I came here that our January enrollment numbers are almost always higher in Kansas City than they are in September. I had not experienced it before, but it's about that kids are leaving different schools in September, October, November after our original count date, and then we have them in the later part of the year. So this is important, needed work. In the Tier 2 side, we have a nutrition services contract with one of these schools who was struggling not only to menu plan and to feed students, but to meet all of the state and federal compliances in order to receive the funding for school nutrition. And so that we are in year, I think we started that in January. So January will be our 3-year anniversary in this partnership, and we're saving them $70,000 a year, and they now are in full compliance because we're running that program for them basically. We're sharing transportation this year with 2 of the smaller charter schools, where we're just shuffling them right into our tiering so that both they and us, once we're all in school appropriately and we're running our buses every day, we'll save some dollars, and they have access to our contract with STA that is a much higher level of service than any of the other charters are able to receive currently. When we wrote that RFP, we specifically told the vendors, when you commit to Kansas City Public Schools, we're asking that you commit to the same pricing structure for a charter school who wants to be a part of you. And so they all have access to that. We've got these two. We're in conversation with another for January, and then we have 4 others interested next year. So that's going to be probably the one, again, thinking about where we were inefficient on spending. This is an area that is critical to all of us. In Tier 3, we are a charter sponsor, as Ms. Wolfsey said. We currently sponsor Allen Village. That is new to us this year, and we were really pleased that they chose us to be their partner when they were looking for a new sponsor. I think I probably put this one in the wrong spot, but I didn't really know where it went. But I think it definitely warrants conversation. When we were looking earlier at that state funding being used to cover the local revenues due to charter schools, and the fact that we're at this tipping point now where there's not enough state funding to pass them all their local, we being this board and the superintendent, voluntarily entered into funding MOUs with the charter schools to make up that difference that the current calculation says they should have, that the state did not have the funds from us to provide to them. We set that up on a quarterly payment system. It's a little bit of a hassle, but it's been exactly what we felt was the right thing to do, even though the state statutes didn't require it of us. So we're making some progress in these collaborations and looking forward to more.
Okay. I just got the move it along from Nate Hogan. So this is our last slide, Nate. I'm letting you know. This is the feedback that we wanted to, as we went through this analysis and then the collaboration, we wanted to provide feedback to DESE around things that we think need to occur. So really, we have over 20 years of data and experience that should be studied in St. Louis and Kansas City. So we are really asking that an impact of charter authorization in the 2 areas that they exist be examined. We also are asking that before legislators, DESE or legislators expand into new markets, that there be an impact analysis on Kansas City and St. Louis before any of that would take place. The other thing that we're recommending is that they require impact analysis of any charters proposed in a school district prior to DESE approval. And this is something you can undertake on your own. It's pretty easy to find by Googling. Really should understand the best practice recommendations in the Annenberg Institute for School Reform, their public accountability for charter schools. A number of I'm the chair of the Government Relations Committee, as Nate mentioned, and a number of the things that we have put forth in some of our legislative priorities of late actually come from that document. It's a fabulous document if you need some good nighttime reading. Nate, I'm going to just ask you real quick. We have questions next, but I don't want us to get off time, and I'm not seeing a lot of questions in the chat. So
no, we don't. I answered the one that we have out there in the chat directly, but nothing else has come through yet.
So what we would say is that as far as questions go, feel free to keep adding them to the chat, and we can actually try to address them at the end if that works out for everybody else. The next person on the agenda is somebody that is, I'm going to tell you, is super near and dear to my heart and to the Kansas City Public Schools. Her name is Janet Tilley. She's with the Missouri School Boards Association, and I just can't say enough great things about her and the organization. They have really helped the Kansas City Public School Board, I want to say, mature over the last 10 to 12 years. So Janet is going to take you through roles and responsibility as far as school board governance. So welcome, Janet.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. I'm hoping that you can hear me. I'm looking at your faces to give me a thumbs up. I'm having a little bit of some internet, who knows what. So if I tend to start lagging or there seems to be a pause, just let me know and I will turn my camera off because I know that sometimes helps. My name is Janet Tilley and I work with the Missouri School Boards Association, and my primary responsibility is to do some of the training that is provided or required by new board members. and also to help with current board members' professional development as they grow in their governance work. So I'm going to share with you just some general kinds of information about the core roles and responsibilities of the school board. And then what's really going to be very helpful is that Nate's going to come in at the end and he's going to talk about what this looks like for Kansas City Public Schools. So we'll just go ahead and jump in. I know that this seems very simplistic to talk about the fact that, you know, a school board is a governing body that's elected by its citizens, but it is, and it's important to know that, that these particular individuals who serve on the school board also have the responsibility of being the leaders and the champions for public education in their communities. And Linda and Jennifer have done a fabulous job of helping you to navigate and to understand what the landscape looks like in Kansas City. The other thing too is that Kansas City is our only school district within the state who has sub-districts where you are elected from a certain sub-district. But one of the things that's important to know and to understand with that is the fact that even though you may be coming from or representing a particular sub-district or you're representing at large, is that you serve the interests of all kids, not just a certain group of kids or a specific area of the city. And I think in watching Kansas City's board work in the last 4 or 5 years that I've had the honor to work with them, you will see that a lot of times you can't tell which sub-district they are from, simply because they have understand that fiduciary responsibility of being the servant for all kids. The other thing that is very different, though, as an elected official with the school board, is that school boards have what is called collective authority, not representative authority. Representative authority is like your state senator, your state rep. And that particular individual is supposed to represent, you know, your community's views and desires. And he or she acts as an individual and can do pretty much what he or she wants. What's different with a school board, however, is that as an individual, you are elected to serve as a whole group, because the authority rests with the whole board, not with any individual. And that is established by the board policy, and it's established by Missouri case law as well. And so sometimes the stakeholders don't understand that. They think, oh, you know, I voted for you, you're from my sub-district, you need to take care of this particular issue that is important to me. And so it's important that those of you who are running for the board understand that the power comes from the group, not from the individual as well. I stole this particular slide from one of my neighboring school board associations from Ohio, because I really liked the way it juxtaposed or shows the difference between serving as a citizen or being a citizen and serving as a school board member. You move from being able to speak as an individual to the fact that you really have to convey the board's decision and message with one voice. And that while as an individual, we can commiserate about issues and we can try to intervene directly, is that in a school district, there is a certain kind of chain of authority or control, and that those concerns have to be navigated in that particular way. The other is that we can sometimes respond with our opinions, but as a board member, you share your opinions, but you follow your board policy and you respond using district level data. And that a lot of times it's not as fast as what you would like for it to be. And so while usually as a citizen, you can respond immediately and you can use personal communication, as a board member, that is different. And I see some things coming up in the chat. So Nate, I'm going to have you hold on to those and we'll talk about those as we go. I use this particular slide to be able to help boards understand the difference between governance leadership and administrative leadership. The board acts with their votes and with their governing documents. And we're going to talk in a minute about what those governing documents are. A superintendent who has the administrative leadership responsibility, he acts through procedures, okay? The board has the responsibility of focusing on the what. We want to be able to provide high quality education to our students in Kansas City. That's what the ends are, but it is the superintendent who determines the how and the means for getting there. The board gives direction to the superintendent. The superintendent is hired and evaluated by the board, but the superintendent then gives direction to the staff. I use this particular picture. I like visual metaphors. And so, I think you can figure out pretty easily kind of where you are. But you were at the top of the Liberty Memorial, just outside of Union Station. And if, we were in an interactive session, I would ask you about why do you think this particular view is the board's view? And why is it important that you have someone or a group who is able to have this kind of view on the landscape of the city? And a lot of it comes from this particular fact. And I've highlighted what are some of the, the architectural or the geographical locations for that you can see from that vantage point. From that vantage point, you can see right to Union Station in Crown Center, which is right in front of you, but you also can see back towards the Power and the Light District. You can also see back into downtown and probably into Crossroads as well. And so it is important that the board has this view, because the board is the one who has that tight connection with the community and has to be able to have that kind of global view of looking out towards the future and looking out for all of the citizens and all of the kids. And you have to have someone who's got that particular viewpoint. You can't stay up here and then be downstairs, tending to, or cleaning the Liberty Memorial at the same time. You've got to have people at the different view levels, and this is the board's view. So what does a board do? Okay, well, one of the first things is the responsibility of the board is clarifying the purpose of the district, helping to clarify what's the district's vision, what's the district's mission, what is it that's important in the district in order to be able to serve the community. The other thing is that the board has this fiduciary responsibility even when it comes to the finances. They've got to approve what is the annual budget. They are responsible for monitoring and the fact that things are being purchased the way that they should, that there is fiscal transparency. The other thing is that there has to be a very tight relationship between the superintendent and the board. We talk about the governance team in the fact that the superintendent and the board work together. However, the board knows that they have to delegate that authority to get the job done to their superintendent and to hold him or her accountable. They do employ, and one of their key responsibilities is to evaluate the superintendent. Then, this is one of the things that's absolutely critical that a board does, and that the board keeps its pulse on what's happening in the district as far as performance is concerned. And I'm not just talking about just academic performance, but also as far as the financial piece is concerned, with personnel, with community partnerships, with what's going on, with the challenges brought by charter schools and charter school development. And so the board has that responsibility to be able to monitor what's going on. The other is that they really are that conduit with the community. The community members are probably more comfortable going up to a board member and sharing a personal concern or an issue than they are necessarily with going up to the superintendent, because the board member lives in the community. And so one of the things that's really important is that there is that two-way communication between the board member, the board members, and the community as well. The other thing that they are responsible for is that they need to demonstrate both ethical and legal governance. We hold them accountable to fulfilling the things that they take an oath to be able to uphold. So here are the board responsibilities, and there are some tools or documents that all of the board uses in order to make sure that they are taking care of their responsibilities. And probably the most important one is school board policy. And the policy provides direction to the superintendent of how to implement these things that the board has said is important. And it's important that policy is up to date, that it follows the law, and that the school board actually really refers to it and uses it as they help to govern. The other governing document of the board is the strategic plan, and we'll talk about that at the very end. But there are a number of plans that are brought to the board for review and approval. And probably none of them are more important than this one, because this one outlines and says, for the next 3 to 5 years, here are the things that we're really going to focus on in our particular school district. And it is the board's responsibility not only to approve that plan, but to monitor that the plan is being used. The other one is their budget, because this is how you control money. And if you have certain priorities in your district, then you need to make sure as a school board that your budget reflects what those priorities are and that there are the funds to be able to do it. I go back to what Jennifer and Linda shared with you about how there was a large sum of money that was dedicated to kind of instructional support positions within the buildings to be able to help teachers and kids. The board said, Dr. Bedell, this is an important thing for us. And so the budget then reflected the fact that funding was put towards those positions. The other is the superintendent evaluation. And this particular process is extremely important because this is how the board holds the superintendent accountable for moving forward with the goals that are outlined in the strategic plan and any other goals that they have set for him or her. So while the board has delegated the operational kinds of things to the superintendent, here is a means that the board has for holding that superintendent accountable for making sure that those processes that he or she is using actually are working and are effective. The other thing that is critical and important is the professional development plan. And while you might look at that and go, oh, that's something that's really about teachers. Well, that's true. But especially like when I reflect back onto, Kansas City, the fact that Dr. Bedell's goals and part of the goals within the strategic plan were very much focused on instructional improvement. And so the professional development plan that the board approves has to reflect the fact that, okay, we're going to provide these kinds of trainings and these kinds of supports to our teachers to make sure that that work can happen. And while it doesn't seem like it's a big thing, the board meeting agenda is also important because the board meeting agenda outlines for the public and communicates to the public of what's important to the board. And it communicates and says, we're going to be working on these particular things. And so one of the things that I ask new board members after they are elected and they go through some of their initial training is that I ask them, if you look at those particular governing documents, is what do they all have in common? And the answer to that is that the board has to approve them. And so I share with them that if in fact the board has to approve all of these, then by golly, A, the board needs to be able to read them, know where to access them. B, that the board actually uses them, all right, and implements them, because it is something then that they have approved. In talking about kind of the responsibilities for a school board member, probably the most important aspect is about ethics. And to understand and to always keep at forefront that their first and primary concern is the educational welfare of all students, not some students, not just my student, but all students. The other is, of course, that they obey the laws of Missouri and the United States, that they recognize that an individual board member has no authority to speak or act for the board. It comes from the whole. That there has to be collaboration with other board members to establish effective board policies. In addition, okay, and we've mentioned this before, is that the board then understands that it's important to delegate authority for administration of the schools to the superintendent, and that they encourage ongoing communications between board members and stakeholders. The other is that they make every effort to attend all board meetings, all work sessions, all trainings, and all designated kind of district and community events. We know that this is a volunteer position. However, there is a huge time commitment that is involved. And Nate's going to talk more specifically in just a minute of what that looks like for Kansas City. The other is that the board understands that it supports the employment of the staff based on their qualifications and not a result of influence, that they support a process of regular and systematic assessment of the educational system. And this is in order to provide accountability to the district. And the other thing is that board members realize they don't know it all. One thing you do need to understand before running for the board is that by state law in Missouri, all new board members have to complete 18.5 hours of training within their first year of service. And in fact, I think Kansas City encourages you to do it even sooner and not just within that 1 year. And this initial board training gives you kind of some support and some understanding of board policy, board operations, of relationships, advocacy, budgeting and finance, all of the different key areas that are going to be important to you in your board service. The other is about avoiding conflicts of interest, and actually it's the appearance thereof. And so sometimes some things of the actions of the board members, it's not that it's really against the law, but it might appear so. And so one of the things is that it's very important that we understand that we avoid conflict of interest, and that we can't use the board position for the benefit of our family members, business associations, etc. And that your personal opinion as a board member is extremely important, but once the board has acted, you have to accept the will of the majority. And that the other that is also very foundational to board ethics is about that we refrain from divulging confidential information. And you will be privy to confidential information as a board member. And board ethics and the expectation is that we refrain from divulging that. One of the questions that I sometimes will ask board candidates is, am I really ready for this? And so I posed then a couple of suggestions or some questions for you, okay? You have to know that you are ready to provide a commitment to serve every student in the district. And they mean every, and that means all students. That you are ready to make the commitment to time. It's not just attending, a board meeting once or twice a month, because then Nate will share with you too that you have to prepare ahead of time for these particular meetings. And it is important that you are in attendance. Some boards and communities and districts will have expectations of board members, of their appearance at community events, their involvement. You've heard Jennifer talk about being on, the governance committee. There are certain additional committees that are usually a part of board service as well. That you understand and you commit to the 18.5 hours of training that is required by law. And as of last year, actually maybe a year and a half ago now, our Missouri legislature passed a bill that requires that you have at least 1 hour of additional training per year. I will tell you that the Kansas City board is committed to additional professional development, and they go well beyond just this 1 hour. The other is that you have the ability to work as a member of a team, and that you understand and know that you're going to become a part of a group, and that it's going to take some communication skills to be able to navigate and to work as a team. And last but not least, and I'm going to pause on this one for just a minute, because we've really seen this one play out during this last year due to COVID, is that you have to be able to withstand public scrutiny. People are going to criticize you. People are not going to be happy with decisions that you make. We have witnessed, unfortunately, this past year, even in my own community, where there have been protests outside of school board members' houses because the community didn't like the board members' vote about returning to school in person or not returning to school in person. You will see things on Facebook. You will see things in social media and so forth. So you have to understand that there will be public scrutiny, and not everybody's going to love you all of the time. The other thing I'm going to tell you as far as your next steps are concerned is that it is very important for you to be knowledgeable of Kansas City Public Schools operations. And I encourage you to go back and to view, past meetings, to view their upcoming board meetings. The beauty of Zoom during this time is the fact that these board meetings have been videotaped. And so you don't have to go physically in person, and you can watch them at any time. But it's important to, especially to look at like the last, 6 months or so, and to see what are those issues that the board has dealt with and how they've been able to communicate with each other and move forward. The other is that you need to become familiar with the Kansas City Public Schools district's plans and initiatives. And there is a website that you can go to where all of these kind of different district plans and initiatives are posted so that you're able to look and to read them. There are a couple that I'm just going to point out that are important to you. One of them is, and I told you about that, this is a governing document for the board, and that is about the strategic plan. This strategic plan outlines what are the goals and the priorities for the district until at least 2023, when the plan will be revised again. And on that webpage, one of the wonderful things that Kansas City does is that they publish an end of the year progress report on how they have done with their strategic plan goals for each year. And this is an excellent way for you to be able to see what they've been working on, what their progress has been. And just with, I'm always impressed with the openness and the transparency that comes about from Kansas City. And this is another demonstration of the fact that they are open and honest with their community of how they are moving forward. The other thing that Kansas City has is they have a scorecard for all of their different strategic plan goals and initiatives. And it shows you in a visual form of how they've been progressing. It shows you what their measures are, and it shows you what their progress is on all of these particular goals. This scorecard is updated regularly. And so again, it's going to be up-to-date information for you. The other that is an important document to be able to look at and to have some understanding of is the Blueprint 2030, and they're planning for the future. I know that Linda and Jennifer gave you a wonderful overview of kind of the educational landscape. This particular document outlines for you really some excellent kind of very focused and strategic planning that Kansas City is doing in planning for their future and up through 2030. So those particular documents are very important for you to examine and to look at. And so I'm going to be quiet and let my contact information is there, but I'm going to be quiet and let Nate, for the time that we have, I'm looking at my time. Oh, we're doing semi-good. Okay. Semi-good. Is that a word? All right. So Nate, I'm going to go back a slide or two, but you talk about Kansas City service.
Yeah, no, Janet, first of all, thank you for doing that. I mean, I just love the passion and your knowledge of not just public education, but more specifically here in Kansas City. And it just shows your commitment to our community and the kids in our district. So thank you for the thoroughness of your presentation. I'll hit on a couple things, and there's so much that you talked about that took me back to, I guess it would have been the summer of 2018 when I first started getting engaged and did a lot of the things that you're talking about in terms of going and sitting in school board meetings. And while people can't do that in person today, being able to jump on a Zoom either in the live stream session or afterwards in their PJs, if that's what they choose to do, is kind of a unique opportunity, if you will. But engaging in the school board meetings, asking questions, meeting the current school board, meeting the superintendent, and wanting to sort of dig deep to understand first and foremost, is this the right thing for me? And it's an important question I think people have to ask themselves, because the commitment's real, right? The commitment is real, and our kids absolutely deserve for you to not get elected and come in and just sort of treat this as any other board meeting. Yeah, I'd served on boards before in the past, and a lot of it was you go in for an hour, you have a meeting, and you forget about it until next month. This is not that sort of opportunity, nor should it be, given the impact that we have on our kids' future. So I'll talk about the number of meetings we have, some time, at least from my perspective, that I spend in preparation mode for those meetings. And then what other sort of things occur that allow opportunities for time commitment that are really important events. So we meet twice a month in most months. In November and December, we only have one school board meeting this year. But most of the time we meet twice a month, and they're on Wednesdays. And the meetings last, they vary to some degree, but they last somewhere. And there's two sessions. There's an executive session and there's a general session. Both of those are open to the public, with the exception of when we have to go into closed session. But we go from starting at 4:30 in the afternoon, and sometimes the meetings last as long as 9 or 9:30 at night. Now, that's not always the case. Sometimes we wrap up at 8 or so, but they're long meetings, right? I mean, that's just the reality. You have to face the fact that there's a lot going on. We are a board that doesn't sort of take this responsibility lightly. And so we dig deep along with Dr. Bedell and his team. I feel bad for them because they've been working all day and then they come into a meeting that's going to last 4 or 5 hours. But so that's twice a month, that you're spending just in board meetings. And I would say, so that encompasses somewhere between, call it 8 to 12 hours a month, just sitting in board meetings. And then the prep time, if to do it right, to really, really do it right, you probably spend another 10 to 18 hours a month. So I remember I asked this question sort of out of the gate as well, because I wanted to make sure that I could live up to the commitment. And it's about 30 hours a month, right? Between the prep that it takes and the school board meetings. And you want to come into those conversations prepared to have the dialogue that's needed. You want to be prepared to ask the right questions. And so again, I always go back to, we owe it to our kids to do that. And then, this has been a little bit different in the COVID era, but I don't like to talk about COVID because the reality is it's going away at some point, and we'll get back to some semblance of normalcy. And so there are lots of events, and a lot of them are really, really fun things to go do that allow you to sort of engage with parents and students and the community at large, whether they be conferences locally or in other parts of the state or around the country. Those take time. There are dinners that are really interesting that we get invited to that you wouldn't get invited to probably otherwise. And so there are some, I'll call them perks, but at the end of the day, you're there to represent KCPS and advocate on behalf of our kids. And so while the events are fun, it's still work that we go do. And so there's an opportunity to get involved in as much or as little of that sort of what I'll call extracurricular stuff as a person wants to. I try to engage in as much of it as I can and still stay married while doing so. And so, that commitment of 30 hours can easily, go into the 40 hours a month, depending on how much you want to engage. I'm a big believer in doing school visits as well, right? To kind of see what's happening in real time with our students and the teachers and administrators in those schools. And so that's another time commitment. So I would say on a minimum, be thinking about 30 hours a month, and then you can take that up, ratchet it up from there based on how much you want to engage directly with the community. So I'll kind of stop there. That's sort of at least what I've seen. I think it probably mirrors what most of our school board would see from their engagement as well. And I think that puts us just a couple minutes over. So anything else, Janet, that you want me to hit on before we transition over to our board secretary, June, to talk about election rules and responsibilities?
Just very quickly, I didn't really talk about my organization, and we are in Columbia, Missouri, also in Jeff City, but we are here to serve board members. That's the reason we exist. And so there are a number of resources on our website for people who are board candidates and being interested in running for the board. So I put our website up there for you to be able to click on there and access those. You may also just email me directly and I'll help you with anything. Okay.
Yeah,
anything you need.
I think that's good. And Janet will live up to that. The other thing I would say is, and I think the other board colleagues of mine would agree with this, like we're all available via email, and our email addresses are on the KCPS website. So feel free if you have questions between now and then. If you decide to run or don't run, or you just want to kind of chat about what the experience is like, I mean, email any or all of us. I'm sure we would all be happy to engage with you directly. So with that being said, June, the floor is yours.
There we go. Thank you so much, Matt. So what I'm going to talk about today are the rules and responsibilities, and are the rules and requirements for what is going on within the next 3 weeks to a month. For candidate filing, if you're thinking about filing and declaring your candidacy for one of the 4 positions open on the school board, here we are. The filing begins December 22nd at 8 a.m. It ends January 19th at 5 p.m. These dates are set in Missouri law, so they can't be changed. The ballot is certified to the Kansas City Election Board on January 26th, and of course, Election Day is April 6th, 2021. These days are already set in standard. So let's talk about candidate filing. In Kansas City Public Schools, we have a first in, first on policy. That just means if you are the first one in line, your name is the first one on the ballot. When we separate because of subdivisions, because each subdivision will have a separate ballot, the names will be put on the ballot by the lowest number in the door first, and then sequentially after that. As a candidate, if you are filing, you must show up to file. And that's because you have to sign a declaration of candidacy And there is a sworn statement on that declaration, and only you can say that you are you. So if you would just show up at 8 o'clock on the 22nd, or any day after that. I'm going to talk about some other dates that we will be open to file. Excuse me. You must sign the forms in person. There are two exceptions to this: military service and the Disabilities Act. Military service, if you are on active duty during the month of December and January, then you can email or mail a declaration of candidacy along with a sworn statement from your commanding officer stating that you are on active duty. Likewise for disabilities, if you are unable to show up in person, you can file by certified mail. You must sign a declaration and a sworn statement from your physician. COVID is not a disability. What seats are open? And I'm just going to fly through this really fast. The seats open are Subdistrict 1, Subdistrict 3, Subdistrict 5, and 1 at-large seat. These are all 4-year terms. And if you're wondering where these seats are, going to do a little swapping around here. So if you will allow me to do that. This is our website. And on our website, if you go to About, Board of Directors, you'll learn everything about our Board of Directors, who they are. You can meet each board member. In this column, find your representative. We'll take you to an interactive map. Excuse me while that loads. It's been a little slow this afternoon. This map will show all of the subdistricts. Oops, wrong direction. We are actually working this year with Subdistrict 1, Subdistrict 3, and Subdistrict 5. You are able to scroll into this map and find out exactly where you live to find out what subdistrict you're located in. Go back to my page here. So those are the seats that are open. They are 4-year terms. Candidate filing, of course, you must file by your legal name. No nicknames are allowed, and I'll explain that at filing. Each candidate must file a financial interest statement. In Missouri, it's called the personal disclosure statement. For other boards, this might be the conflict of interest form, but this is a state requirement. And once again, I'm going to flip back and forth to screens, but I'd like to show you the screen where this exists on our website. And so we're on the website. I'm going to go back to the About Board of Directors page, and I'm going to go to Board Election. This page has everything you need to know about the elections, school board school, a map showing the dates where we are open, which I'll talk about that in a moment. But it also has a series of links. These 3 links are the PowerPoint shared tonight. This is the filing packet in your petitions for candidacy. This is the Missouri Ethics Commission election packet for 2021. This document is the financial disclosure statement that you may fill out. You may fill it out and send it to the Missouri Ethics Commission by mail, or they have a link on their website where you can just fill it out on the Missouri Ethics Commission website at mec.mo.gov. This website is filled with a lot of information for running a campaign. But this is a required document, and you will be asked to fill it out. By February 7th. I believe that is the date that it is due. Candidate filing dates. Our offices will be open for candidate filing 8 a.m. to noon, December 22nd. Then 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m., January 4th through 19th. January 19th is the final day of filing, and the doors have to close at 5 p.m. We have to be completely done at that time because this is state statute. I do want to point out that our offices are closed on holidays and weekends, so we will not be open for Martin Luther King's birthday. And if our office is closed for inclement weather, or because we have COVID in the building, there will be no filing. You will know if the offices are closed because it'll be on the media channels. But otherwise, we'll be there. I will be there 8:30 to 4, January 4 through 19, to answer any questions that you have. Pardon me. My email address is board@kcpublicschools.org, and you can see my phone number. Please email me, go to the website, whatever you need. I'm happy to help and to answer whatever questions you have.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, June, for that. And so please note that the email address there at the bottom of the screen. You're welcome to email the school board members. I know if I get an email that has a specific question about the election, I'm probably going to forward it over to June because I don't want to give you incorrect dates. I understand the process, but it's just important that we get it right if you're interested in doing this, and June will get it right. So I want to give a shout out to everyone who presented tonight. So thank you, Linda, Jennifer, Janet, June, all of you guys for being part of this conversation. Thank you for everyone in the community who joined. Hopefully you got the information that you were looking forward to, the information that you need in order to be able to go consider this seriously. We want people to run. That's why we're doing this. We want people interested in school board. I frankly think it is the most important elected position in this city. I mean, you're talking about the future of generations to come. And so I don't think there's a more important position for you to engage in. So please, please, please get engaged, ask questions. We'll be here to answer them as the need exists. But otherwise, thank you for joining, and way to wrap up at exactly 6:30. Enjoy your evening. Bye, guys.